Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister. However...
Welcome to today's in-depth exploration of the instability of British politics, where issues of competence, defence expenditure and leadership interact. In the most recent House of Commons collision, we saw eminent government official Kemi Badenoch attacking Labour Party leader Keir Starmer.
But Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't very clear. How is it that the Defence Secretary says £6 billion and he says £13.4 billion?
She charged him with being patronising and evasive while he tried to respond directly on defence expenditure. Often positioned as the substitute for the current government, Starmer seemed unprepared, fumbling through his answers and unable to clearly state his views when challenged. Particularly at a time when the UK confronts what he personally describes as a generational security threat, the performance left many viewers wondering about his leadership ability. Make sure to like and subscribe for more. In a separate but related vein, Starmer has promised to raise Britain's defence budget to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, and then drive that amount to 3% by 2033. Funded mostly by cutting the UK's foreign aid budget from 0.5% of national revenue to 0.3%. This strong commitment comes with a hefty price tag. Critics, including some Labour backbenchers, call this choice short-sighted, contending that reducing foreign aid compromises the moral reputation of the nation and long-term world security. Starmer argues, however, that this action is necessary to protect Britain's borders and perform its NATO responsibilities, particularly given the current crisis in Ukraine and American pressure to increase military expenditure.
He hasn't answered. What he has said is different from what he said yesterday. We are still not clear where the money is coming from.
Today's story will examine the two facets of Starmer's recent political challenges: his poor performance in PMQS versus Kemi Badenoch, and the broad new defence policies that contradict portions of his own party and the international community. By the end, we will evaluate what these events reveal about the situation of British democracy, how an apparently unstable leader might affect public confidence, and what all this implies about the UK's position on the world scene.
He's also said that we should put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. We haven't seen the detail of any proposals. Would his new spending plans allow him to fund this commitment effectively?
Imagine the House of Commons on a normal Wednesday afternoon bursting with political assistants, reporters, and members of Parliament. As the Speaker calls the House to order for Prime Minister's questions, the chamber is humming with expectancy. Usually the Prime Minister answers questions from the opposition, but on this occasion the dynamics change as Kemi Badenoch approaches, firm, relentless, prepared to examine Keir Starmer's policies and statements.
But we need to know exactly what it is we're supporting. We need clarity and transparency over the money. We also need to know where this money is going. This morning, the Defence Secretary could not say if the Chagos deal would come out of the defence budget. Can he confirm to the House that none of the defence uplift includes payments for his Chagos deal?
The scene is underlined with tension. Cameras flash to capture every expression as Badenoch rises to speak. She accuses Starmer of being evasive and patronising, therefore directly aiming at his track record on defence. Her words: "Someone needs to tell the Prime Minister that being patronising is not a substitute for answering the question." Her speech is clean and her tone is sharp, meant to undermine any moral high ground Starmer could try to assert.
Mr. Speaker, someone needs to tell the Prime Minister that being patronising is not a substitute. It's not a substitute for answering questions. It's not a substitute.
Everybody turns to Starmer, anticipating a strong counterattack that would highlight his preparedness to rule. Ultimately, he is the leader of the opposition and a former attorney distinguished by his forensic approach to interrogation. Instead, though, an embarrassing sequence of half-answers and what seem to be deflections results. Starmer stammers, apparently startled by Badenoch's sharp inquiries. He never quite strikes a clear blow when he tries to turn the emphasis back to the Prime Minister or to the more general policies. Every time he attempts to discuss defence budget, he avoids the precise figures or justification for them.
I think it's the same question again.
The chamber has a clear feeling of Starmer's loss of upper hand. Whispers abound on the benches. Each government side bursts in laughter or contemptuous cheers every time he misses a chance to express his position. Even Starmer's own associates glance worriedly as their boss misses the mark. For someone looking for the keys to number 10, this interaction is a pivotal test. The issue becomes, how can he command confidence in the face of worldwide scrutiny, especially when major decisions on military and foreign policy loom, if he cannot manage Badenoch's probing in PMQs?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the additional spend I announced yesterday is for our capability on defence and security in Europe, as I made absolutely clear yesterday. The Chagos deal is extremely important for our security, for US security.
From this combustible scenario, we get a picture of a leader on the rear foot struggling for clarity and control. Unquestionably, a prime ministerial candidate who seems unprepared for direct challenges and unable to provide solid responses to simple questions is not. It's a startling contrast to the picture of a cool, collected statesman Starmer usually aims for.
The deal is well over a century, but the funding I announced yesterday is for our capability to put ourselves in a position to rise to a generational challenge. That is what that money is all about, and I thought she supported it.
Keir Starmer's trouble at PMQs with Kemi Badenoch is not one-off occurrence. Viewers have observed that he sometimes comes across as too exact in his approach, yet not always fast on his feet when confronted with unanticipated lines of attack. For a former Director of Public Prosecutions, this is an odd quality, since one would anticipate flawless calm under duress.
That's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War.
Critics of Starmer contend that his seeming evasiveness results from a more general uncertainty regarding policy specifics. In the heated back and forth over defence, he routinely quotes general ideas, such as the need to protect British interests or our NATO obligations, without specifically addressing year-on-year spending figures or how these expenditures will be really justified in a complicated global environment. His inclination for stressing universal moral obligations usually runs counter to the pragmatic demands of legislative investigation, in which case lawmakers and the public yearn for hard, cold facts. The tension in the room increases every time Starmer turns aside. He seems to be waiting for a chance to move the debate back to his comfort zone. Critiques of the economic record of the present government, the expense of living, or even ministerial misbehaviour. Still, the argument usually turns against him, particularly if he neglects to show initiative. Consequently, the picture of a floundering leader is strengthened, which raises questions over his ability to react fast in a parliamentary setting with rapid tempo. This underperformance trend affects democracy in a more general sense. Strong debate is one of the foundations of the Westminster system, since a good leader of the opposition holds the government responsible. When Starmer fails to present a cogent line of reasoning, it compromises not just his personal leadership, but also the entire mechanism guaranteeing checks and balances on presidential authority. Should the people view him as unprepared, it runs the danger of erasing faith in the alternative the Labour Party offers, therefore compromising democratic responsibility. These issues are particularly relevant when national security and defence are involved, since in this arena clarity and strong leadership are very vital.
We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027.
Starmer stumbles in the Commons, but his government in waiting seeks to project strength on world events. With a longer-term view of achieving 3% by 2033, his most recent action is a headline-grabbing promise to hike defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. He presents this as a direct answer to what he regards as a generational security challenge. A period marked by Russian aggression in Ukraine, simmering tensions with major countries, and ongoing requests from allies like the United States to carry a greater share of NATO's collective defence.
Well, we didn't expect it because we don't really expect Keir Starmer to do anything very quickly once he's talked about it.
The defence strategy developed by Starmer comes with a high cost. Beginning in 2027, he suggests an annual £6 billion increase that will rise still to reach the 3% aim. The caveat is that this will be funded by cutting the foreign aid budget from 0.5% of national revenue to 0.3%, an action that has caused great debate. Critics inside his own party refer to it as short-sighted, implying that world stability can be promoted and conflicts avoided with development help. Cutting it, they contend, is like treating symptoms instead of tackling the causes of instability elsewhere.
Up until now, he was saying he wanted to increase defence spending, but he wasn't even putting a date on it. And all of a sudden, he's sort of snapped his heels together and actually done something.
Yes. Who would have thought it? Shock horror. Prime Minister in doing something shock.
For Starmer, nevertheless, the reasoning is simple. The defence and security of the British people must always come first. He presents this posture as a required decision, evocative of a military perspective demanding sacrifice. Many others, meanwhile, are left wondering whether this is a sincere dedication to strong national defence, or a political ploy meant to appease hawkish members of his party, and most importantly, provide a message to Washington indicating the UK is still a loyal friend. This is the central argument. Is Starmer really prepared to modify Britain's defence priorities over the long run, or is this vow more about political optics, pandering over flaws in his approach that were exposed in passionate PMQ exchanges?
13.4 billion extra on defence spending every year until 2027, then a commitment to spending 3% on defence in the next Parliament, saying that he will do that, again, it's a shock horror moment, by reducing the foreign aid budget from 0.5% of GDP to 0.3%. What would David Cameron think?
Kemi Badenoch picked up on these contradictions during the PMQ's debate setting the stage for so much current political talk. She insisted on particular details. Would Starmer promise to keep year-on-year increases in defence expenditure? Or were his commitments more like high aspirations eclipsed by harsh economic reality? Starmer sidestepped the inquiry, emphasising instead on personal digs at the Prime Minister and noting his weekend itinerary as the reason he had not entirely absorbed Badenoch's remarks, in a moment that elicited shouts of laughter and loud jeers from the government benches. This seems to be a bad move. Starmer came out as flippant rather than defending or reaffirming his defence expenditure plan, which infuriated Badenoch to say, "Someone needs to tell the Prime Minister that being patronising is not a substitute for answering the question." She said something that really connected. Political commentators grabbed on the event right away, running video on social media and analysis programmes. The section highlighted Starmer's apparent lack of clarity and preparation, therefore supporting a story that has followed him for months. The Labour leader finds it difficult to act fast when faced with specifics. In a political context that calls for adaptability, particularly on issues as high stakes as national security, this apparent shortcoming can be devastating. Furthermore, Badenoch's inference that Starmer was patronising, that is, downing her, frames him as out of touch and contemptuous. In politics, where ideas of condescension or elitism can rapidly erode voter confidence, this representation can be perilous. Starmer has to show not only strong policy expertise but also a capacity to interact politely with detractors if he is to guide the nation. Badenoch kept pressing him, the strain evident as each query became a nail in Starmer's performance that day's coffin. Rather than recovering ground, he seemed to withdraw, stuttering through half-formed responses. The effects of this interchange transcend one parliamentary session. It shapes public impression of Starmer's preparedness for leadership. Polls revealing declining faith in the Labour leader can turn events like today, PMQs, into a focal point for more general discontent. The last thing the opposition needs is a leader apparently caught off guard in front of the whole nation, and indeed the world, at a time the UK is struggling with what Starmer himself characterises as an existential security issue. All these events fit a story of a leader constantly on the back foot. Starmer's PMQ performance in relation to Kemi Badenoch revealed a lack of preparation. Though apparently audacious, his defence spending commitment is supported in a way that has prompted criticism and charges of naivety. Internal party conflict and upcoming foreign discussions increases pressure to show vision and skill. Politics is strongly influenced by public opinion. Voters could come to believe Starmer is not the safe pair of hands they want if they view him as someone who cannot properly answer straightforward questions about national security. An intangible but powerful force, confidence in leadership shapes people's faith of a party in handling crises, treaty negotiations or economic direction. Right now, PMQ signs point to Starmer's difficulty projecting that confidence. Although poll results may vary, once the label of incompetent or ill-prepared clings, it is famously difficult to remove. In a more general democratic setting, a weak opposition promotes either authoritarianism or complacency inside the dominant government. Executive power might be unbridled without strong inspection. Although this situation might help the government in the near future, it hardly benefits the long-term welfare of the country. Whether it's about strengthening defence capability or redefining foreign policy priorities, Starmer has to learn to clearly state his vision for Britain and support it with specifics. Furthermore, fueling mistrust is the conflict between Starmer's rhetorical flourishes, defining an era as a generational challenge, and the dubious maths underlying his expenditure plans. His friends and critics both demand clarity. From where exactly the money comes? How will Britain handle new or developing risks with this large reallocation of funds? Should the responses continue evasive, Starmer runs the danger of alienating not only party supporters, but also a public that may otherwise be inclined towards strengthening national defence. Strong leadership ultimately calls for qualities Starmer has yet to convincingly exhibit: the capacity to stay firm, respond to difficult issues, and negotiate political crossfire. Keir Starmer's latest parliamentary confrontation with Kemi Badenoch and his promise to boost defence expenditure expose in the final analysis a politician entangled in a web of public expectation, internal party constraints, and changing global reality. Starmer is right, on the one hand, that the UK is under major danger. Russia's aggressiveness, transatlantic relations uncertainty, and the residual consequences of Brexit all call for a strategic reaction. On the other hand, his presentation of his answers, sidestepping questions, fumbling specifics, slashing foreign aid, raises worries about his readiness to run. Badenoch's sharp comments during PMQs highlight a fundamental weakness in Starmer's strategy, a propensity to seem patronising and elusive rather than firm and direct. In a democracy where responsibility rules, the leader of the opposition has to make the government answerable. Still, Starmer's poor performance reveals a vulnerability that might make Labour less able to offer a respectable substitute for the status quo. Starmer has a limited opportunity going forward to fix these flaws. Crucially, tests of his statesmanship will be his forthcoming meeting with President Trump and the delicate balancing between increasing the defence spending and upholding moral obligations to overseas aid. He might yet save Labour's reputation if he can effectively match strategic realism with its fundamental principles. Should he continue to stumble under duress, though, the impression of ineptitude may deepen and compromise his personal reputation, as well as the larger democratic process dependent on a vigorous opposition. British politics is finally hardly forgiving. Surviving it calls for a combination of vision, clarity, and resilience. Qualities Starmer must now show in plenty if he intends to negotiate the storm he finds himself in and come out as a leader really ready to take over.